The 1937 vintage residential building was designed by master Sacramento architect Leonard Starks to serve as his own residence. It is a masterful composition of masonry forms of varied heights and shapes, blanketed with a rich collection of tiled hip roofs. Leonard Starks was a native of California, born in Healdsburg in 1891. In 1900, his family moved to San Francisco, where he completed his architectural course at the Wilmerding School of Industrial Arts in 1908. He then went to work for the office of Bakewell and Brown. In 1912, Starks transferred to the Panama Pacific International Exposition, or PPIE, as an assistant designer, where he designed several of the exposition's buildings. He also worked with several of San Francisco's prominent architects, including Bernard Maybeck, whom he assisted with the design work on the Palace of Fine Arts. He worked with Bakewell and Brown on the design of the Palace of Horticulture. Here is where Starks lived at the time. After completion of the exposition work, Starks moved to the East Coast due to his involvement with the study system established by the Beaux-Arts School of Architecture in Paris, and taught by its graduates in San Francisco and other cities. The 7 years Starks spent working as a student was during evenings and weekends as he worked full-time. Starks moved to Washington, D.C., where he worked until the end of the First World War, and then he moved to New York in 1919, where he was in charge of Thomas W. Lamb's office, designing theaters and other public structures throughout the United States and Canada.
In 1919, Starks married Eleanor Whalen. She was a graduate of Amherst College and worked as a journalist for newspapers in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. She subsequently worked for an architect in San Francisco during the construction of the exhibit buildings for the 1915 PPIE. This is likely when they first met. These photos were probably taken by Leonard. Since Eleanor had worked as a professional journalist, she probably was a press liaison on behalf of the architects. With numerous daily and weekly newspapers throughout the Bay Area, California, and the world, someone needed to handle the press so the architects could get their work done. Curiously, Leonard's nickname for Eleanor was Pike. This was probably because of her work protecting the architects. In ancient warfare, the pikeman's job was to protect the archers from the enemy cavalry. Pike. Get the point?
After the construction of the exposition, Eleanor returned to Massachusetts. The First World War had broken out, and she went to work as a volunteer for the American Ambulance Service in France. It is interesting that as Eleanor returned to the East Coast, Leonard was not far behind. In 1921, the Lamb architectural firm obtained a commission by Famous Players Incorporated to build a chain of theaters on the West Coast. At that time, the general manager of the theater company was Harris Connick, who had been the director of works for the Panama Pacific Exposition. Starks got the job and was sent to Sacramento to build the first theater. Due to an antitrust suit, the project was later abandoned. The Famous Players Company was attempting to create a vertical monopoly by owning the actors, film production and distribution, as well as theaters. A few years after losing the court case, Famous Players changed their name to Paramount Pictures. Starks decided to stay in Sacramento and open his own architectural firm. Local investors became interested in the project, and Starks soon had his first major commission to design and build the Senator Theater. Starks soon became a partner of a well-known Sacramento architect, E.C. Hemmings. Their firm was retained by the Elks Lodge in 1923 to begin preliminary sketches for their new building at 11th and J Streets. Just following the order to begin preparation of working drawings for the Elks Lodge in June of 1924, Hemmings died. By early 1925, Starks had taken in another partner, Edward F. Flanders, and the two continued in business together until Flanders' death in 1941. After that time, Starks ran the business under his own name until the mid-1950s, when it became Starks, Josens, and Nacht. In 1965, it became Starks, Josens, Nacht, and Lewis. In this 1956 office Christmas party photo, both Nacht and Lewis are present. The company is still in business at the present time as Nacht & Lewis, and they recently celebrated their 100th anniversary. Here are some of the more well-known projects by Starks and his associates. In addition to his work as an architect, Starks was involved in professional activities and organizations. In 1930, he became a member of the Sacramento Building Code Board of Examiners and Appeals, on which he served for the next 32 years. Starks was an active member of the San Francisco chapter of the American Institute of Architects, and later served as the first president of the Northern California chapter after it was established. He was the first architect to serve as the president of the Sacramento Builders Exchange. After his retirement in 1965, Starks turned to his hobby of watercolor painting. His works were hung in many juried art shows, and he won many honorable mentions and place ribbons. He was a member of the Rocky Rollers, an informal group of retired architects and engineers that engaged in collective painting excursions as well as exhibitions. Some of its members were, along with Starks, Alfred Eichler, Orion Shields, Frank Dietz, Leonard Hill, and William Wintle. Starks purchased a Rolls-Royce to transport the Rocky Rollers to their painting sites. He died in 1986. Now, let's take a look at the house.
The current owners of the house are Peter and Susan Saucerman. He's a retired architect and a sketch artist. Let's go in. The living room is amazing. It is easy to make the connection between Starks, the theater designer, and this room. Look at that ceiling. This stair with wrought iron balustrade takes you to Starks' work studio. This first floor den could easily be a bedroom or a TV room. The dining room is as eye-catching as the living room. Look at that sideboard. Let's take a closer look at the stenciling. The dining room and the kitchen. Look at the wood beam ceiling with stenciling. Let's take a closer look. Now let's go upstairs. The master bedroom is spacious. Notice the painted Chinese cabinet. This is the upstairs bath. Now, let's take our time and look at some of the art.
Eleanor died in 1968, just 3 years after Leonard's retirement. In her obituary, which was written by her husband, he wrote that after her work on the International Exposition, she returned to Boston. The headquarters of the American Ambulance Service in France was there, but she did not stay. She could not resist the temptation. Pike went to France, where she became an ambulance driver. The work was hard and dangerous. Sometimes when there was a major offensive being fought, drivers worked 36 and sometimes 72-hour shifts, with few breaks for sleep or nourishment. They shuttled the wounded back from the front and then turned around to go back for more of the wounded. During these runs, they were exposed to constant artillery fire. Most of the ambulance drivers experienced close calls, and some were killed. At the end of World War I, Eleanor returned from France with a service ribbon from the French Army. The volunteers of the American Ambulance Service in France were automatically enrolled as members of the French Army. Eleanor also brought home a Croix de Guerre, a War Cross medal, which was awarded to French and Allied soldiers individually cited for a wartime act of gallantry while under enemy fire. The only mention of Eleanor's service in France was in her obituary. Eleanor probably never talked about her service. As many veterans have said, "Remember? You want me to remember? I have spent my life since then trying to forget."